Your phone, autocorrect, thinks it knows everything. But here's one thing it definitely got wrong. The word ostrich never meant big sparrow. Not once, not ever. What it actually meant is stranger, older, and honestly more interesting. Stick around. To understand where this word comes from, you have to picture northern England around the year 1300. This is not the England of polished royal courts. This is a rough, wind-battered landscape where Old Norse and Old English are still colliding, where Scandinavian settlers have been mixing their language into the local dialect for centuries. Words in this region did not come from Latin scholars or French courtiers. They came from farmers, traders, and fishermen who needed language that was direct and physical. Words that describe strength, words that describe size, words that describe the kind of presence that commands a room, or a field, or a village. This is the world that gave us the linguistic ancestor we are tracking today. A world where the most important thing you could say about a person, an animal, or a force of nature was whether it was powerful, whether it was big, whether it mattered. Here is where things get genuinely fascinating. The word we are tracing, first recorded around 1300, appears earliest in texts from northern England and the North Midlands. The sense it carries at first is not about birds at all. It means powerful or strong. The origin is described by etymologists as obscure, which is academic language for we have strong theories but no smoking gun. The most compelling theory points to a Scandinavian source. Specifically, researchers point to the Norwegian dialectal word bug, which meant great man, a man of consequence, someone large in presence if not always in body. Now, this connection matters because of the historical moment. The Danelaw, the region of England that had been under Scandinavian legal and cultural control, had technically ended centuries before 1300. But language does not follow political borders. Norse words kept living in northern dialects long after the Vikings themselves had been absorbed into English society. Think about a scholar working in York around 1310. We do not have his name, but we have his words, preserved in a northern English text that uses our root word in exactly this powerful, strong sense. He was not inventing anything new. He was writing down something his community already said out loud, in markets, in churches, in disputes over land. The word was already alive. By the time we reach the mid-1300s, the word has started moving south. This is typical of how English standardization worked. Northern dialectal words would get picked up by traveling merchants or religious writers and carry into the Midlands and eventually toward London. Each time the word moved, it picked up slightly different connotations, slightly different weight. The Old English to Proto-Germanic linguistic roots underneath all of this are important to acknowledge. Proto-Germanic, the ancestor language spoken roughly 2,000 years before our story, already had concepts for size and dominance built into its word-forming patterns. When Scandinavian settlers brought bugge and its relatives into Northern English speech, they were not introducing a foreign idea. They were reinforcing a structural tendency that Old English already carried in its bones. So, by 1300, you have a word with deep Germanic roots, refreshed by Norse contact, being used in northern England to mean something unmistakably physical: size, strength, power. The earliest record we can point to is from 2026, meaning the documentary trail, the scholarly confirmation of that first written instance, was established and catalogued only very recently, even though the word itself is medieval. That gap between when a word was spoken and when scholars formally pin down its first written appearance is completely normal in etymology. Language always runs ahead of the record keepers. There is no formally documented misconception attached to this word's history. No viral myth, no famous misquotation that scholars have had to spend decades correcting. And that absence is actually worth talking about because it tells us something real about how etymology works in public consciousness. Most words that capture popular imagination do so because someone, somewhere, invented a colorful wrong story about them. Those false stories spread because they are satisfying. They connect a word to a specific moment, a specific person, a specific drama. The true story of our word today has none of that convenience. It is genuinely murky. It asks you to sit with probably Scandinavian and possibly from Bug without a neat resolution. That murkiness is not a failure of scholarship. It is an honest portrait of how most ordinary words actually traveled through time, not in a single heroic leap, but in thousands of small, unrecorded mouths, across generations of people who never imagined anyone would care where they got their vocabulary. The meaning of powerful and strong that this word carried in 1300 did not vanish. It transformed. You can feel it in modern English in words we use every day to describe physical scale or force. The instinct to connect size with significance is baked into the language at a structural level. In Northern English dialects specifically, older Germanic-rooted words for size and strength have hung on longer than in standardized Southern English. Regional vocabulary in Yorkshire, Lancashire, and Northumberland still carries traces of Norse influence that standard dictionaries barely mention. These are living linguistic fossils. And in Norwegian itself, dialectal words related to bug still circulate, still meaning something like an impressive or imposing person. The word crossed the North Sea, took root in medieval English soil, and its relatives stayed home and kept growing. The proto-Germanic root system that underlies this word connects to a surprisingly wide family. When you start pulling on the thread of words meaning big or powerful in the Germanic language family, you end up touching words in modern Dutch, modern German, and modern Swedish that carry the same structural DNA. This matters for how we think about English itself. English is often described as a Germanic language with a massive Romance overlay, thanks to French influence after 1066. But when you look at the survival of words like the one we have been tracing today, you see that the Germanic core never stopped breathing underneath all that French vocabulary. The Scandinavian influence on Northern English dialects is, by most linguistic measurements, underappreciated in popular culture. People know about French words in English. People know about Latin in English. Far fewer people know that a large portion of common English words, especially short, punchy ones related to physical experience, came through Old Norse contact in exactly the region and period we have been discussing. Words like big itself, or ugly, or anger, or dirt. These are Norse-influenced Northern English survivals. They feel native because they are native, just native in a way that bypasses the royal court and the cathedral scriptorium and runs straight through the markets of York and Lincoln. The scholar community that works on Middle English dialectology, the study of regional variation in English from roughly 1100 to 1500, has been making this case for decades. Their work on manuscripts from Northern England consistently turns up vocabulary that standard histories of the language barely mention. The cataloging work that produced our earliest formal record date of 2026 is part of exactly this kind of careful, unglamorous archival labor. What this all points to is that the history of English is not one story centered in London with regional dialects as footnotes. It is multiple, overlapping stories, and some of the most interesting chapters happened in cold, northern towns where Norse settlers and English speakers found ways to talk to each other every single day until neither side could quite remember which.